Just a quick one today because yesterday's session was pretty short. It was mostly taken up by a single combat. There were a couple of other things that happened, like they took a rest. Um, they leveled up at the end of the session and everything. But for the most part, the whole session was just one combat against a couple of goblins on excite bikes. And it was kind of a teaser slash introduction of the technologically inclined Goblin faction. So I got to use a few of the stat blocks I was really excited about. I leaned towards doing this encounter because at the beginning of the session I had given the Artificer a quest card, and the quest was to gather a material so that they could make their, I think it's called Steel Guardian, one of those features that the Artificer can get at third level. I guess it's kind of like a subclass, but it just kind of seems like it doesn't really feel like a subclass. It just feels like here's one thing that you can make or whatever, but that's besides the point. I decided that instead of just randomly having a robot thing like pop into existence just because he's third level, I would have him, I would require him to gather some stuff for it. And coincidentally, I also wanted them to fight these guys. So at the end, he was able to use those parts to assemble a robot buddy. The Excite Bytes themselves are like kind of cool. They're a vehicle. They give whoever's riding it a lot of move speed. I think 80 feet is what I had it at. And it adds the ability of, if they cross through somebody's space, then they have to make a dex save or take damage. And it was kind of significant damage because the wheels were basically like big saw blades. These monsters, or these goblins in particular, my players pointed out were particularly cartoonish in the way that they fought, and I think I was cool with that. But it was interesting because the vehicles, like, even though there were three goblins, there was two driving and there was one in a sidecar, and yet the action economy was like totally fine. Because it looked like they were just going to, because they killed the guy in the sidecar, the goblin gunner, before he even got to make an attack. So it was like, okay, this combat's gonna be over in like 2 seconds. But then just like the movements being really fast, the fact that it was dark and they had disadvantage on some of their attacks, the fact that one of the goblins, the Goblin Tinker, is able to summon little like 1 HP kind of like chomper things. They're basically like the wind up teeth toy, and they'll just like randomly attack whoever they're nearby. And and then the vehicles themselves essentially give you like a second attack, because if you go through somebody's space and you do damage to them, that's kind of like using your movement as an action, which is powerful in terms of like upping your action economy. It also allowed them the ability to, if instead of moving they wanted to have a defensive turn, they could give up their movement, and as a bonus action they could create a smoke screen around them. So between all of that, the action economy was like pretty well balanced, and this fight took forever. Some of it was because my players weren't making optimal decisions. Some of it was because we couldn't find our battle mat, which was silly. I usually leave it over there. I don't have my own. I'm thinking about getting my own now, just because if it stays lost, it'll be helpful. I think that would have sped up combat a lot, instead of having to describe like where everybody is in relation to everyone else. But yeah, it was kind of interesting because you had players like jumping onto the bikes, chasing after the bikes. The Dancer used an ability on the Goliath to give him more movement speed and let him dash as a bonus action. So when the bike was like 60 feet away or wherever, he just ran. He just like sprinted to catch up with it, which I think was really cool. Little combat moment. I guess one of the main things to reflect on is, if the combat was so long, was it tedious as well? It was long, and then it's kind of up to question whether it was like not fun because of it. And I think I had a good time. There were like a couple turns where it was just sort of like I attack and then I miss kind of thing, which isn't super exciting. When I was like narrating everything, I think I narrated like at least a little bit almost every attack, whether it missed or not, which does kind of take a lot. But it's like not satisfying to just say like you miss and that's it. Instead, if they're trying to like grab one of the little chompers and they miss, then I want to describe it as like, well, because it's raining, like these guys are like slippery and you're like trying to get them and stuff like that, and they keep barely getting away from you. I don't know if it's worth like the time to do that on almost every attack, but it also felt weird to just say like you missed or you hit, I wanted the attacks to feel impactful. So as far as the stat blocks I was using, these goblins, I already said that one of the abilities was to summon little minions, which made a big difference. And because you can kind of split your movement and your action, they were able to basically just like drive by, drop a couple of these minions, and then like keep going. But then they brought out their weapons, and there were two different goblins who were driving the bikes, the Excite bikes, which I think is a fun name. One of them was a goblin engineer, and his weapon is a rotary blade, basically like a rotary saw blade on a stick, or kind of like a weed whacker sort of thing. So when the artificer was riding on the back of the bike trying to attack this goblin, I described it as like he reaches over and he starts revving up his weapon, and they were all like, oh my gosh. And then the other one, the goblin tinker, his weapon is essentially like a chain chomp from Mario on like one of those scissor, like a scissor extension. So it's very cartoony. He just uses his little scissor thing to like extend out the chomp, and then it like can reach up to 10 feet and like grab you and like pull you, or can do like a multi-attack. So basically just some like really goofy stuff, and a couple of them went down. It was like, it's super hard to predict how the combats are gonna go. You give them a combat where you think like there are three guys, they're on bikes, but they're outnumbered, so they'll go down pretty quickly, and like pretty much all my guys have ranged attacks. But then it ends up taking like an hour and a half or something just to get through the combat. Hard to predict. It's really hard to predict. I think maybe their HP was a little bit high, but I don't know. It didn't feel tedious to me because I was like busy narrating everything, but I think for some of my players it did get like a little bit stale. So I don't know, something to consider. Can always like tweak the numbers or whatever. If I saw that this was kind of taking a while, I could have just decided, this goblin is one hit away from dying, and just left it at that. Or just decided like I want these guys to like take about 2 hits and then die. And then I could have used that instead of the direct XP. I think I sort of did. I don't know if they exactly did enough damage to kill each goblin, but yeah, I don't know. So that was the full combat session, the single combat session, and I guess I need to, think of ways to avoid it getting like overly long in the future. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Not too much to report on.